Hi, Nick. Welcome to Jeff's Podcast Academy. It's so great to have you here. I mean, I've been using Audry for a really long time. And at first, when I signed up, I never thought I would have you, the founder of Audry, on my show. So just please tell a little bit about yourself and your journey of, building this amazing platform called Audry so far.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me and allow me to come on the show. I mean, my name is Niklas. I'm one of the co-founders of Audry, and we launched the company in 2020. So in March, just when the pandemic started to hit, we launched a platform and started reaching out to podcasters to invite them to join us on this journey to build this community of podcasters. And before that, I worked already as an entrepreneur. I was building different projects and software for creators, acted mostly for YouTubers and Instagram, smaller businesses before this. And this all accumulated then in building this platform for the specific creators that are podcasters.
Awesome. So any spark that you had, like, a guest picking platform? I mean, it's more right now, but any spark that you had while you're starting, or any spark like, this is it, we have to start, stuff like that?
Yeah, in our previous venture, we helped, actually the other side, we helped advertisers and brands reach more customers through influencers about that. And one of the things we had built was a tracking software for Instagram, where brands could track stories and could track posts of the influencers that we're working with.
Yeah.
And one day, one of our customers approached us asking if we had anything for podcasters. And that kind of triggered our start and triggered us to really investigate the podcasting market, because we hadn't done that much so far. Looked into what our client was doing, looked how they work with podcasters, then realized that as much as the brands have problems finding podcasters to work with, podcasters have way more problems that they need help with than bigger corporations that already have all the money. Yeah. So instead of then focusing on helping advertisers, helping brands make more money through ads, we said, what if we actually started helping podcasters, because they're so underserved in the market? And then we started investigating the problems. So growth is a major problem. Networking with other podcasters is a major problem. Start with the idea of Audry, send some emails to some podcasters, verifying whether that's actually something they wanted, and then launched a prototype in early 2020.
Got it. That's really great, because the one thing when you mentioned is that the podcasters are actually finding really hard than the companies, because as podcasters, the first question they will ask is when I will get monetized, when the podcast will be monetized, and what's the first thing will come to a sponsorship. So yeah, I think that is really great. So I just want to give make you give a little context. Like, for example, for those people who doesn't know what Audry actually is. So if you just tell us a little bit about, what the platform is about, and what are your future plans, if you just, put it in a nutshell, or even if you elaborate an answer would be great.
Yeah, sure. So Audry is a platform for podcast creators and hosts to connect, network, and find partners to help each other grow and help lift each other up. So there's no other fans on the platforms, there's no listeners, there's no brands. It's exclusively built for the people that make the podcasts and they create the content. And right now, at the beginning, we focused a lot on the growth aspect. So we allow all the podcasters to browse the entire community of now over 16,000 podcast creators, find people in their niche, and connect, network, and then potentially work together. We see a lot of people doing interview swaps, where they interview each other on each other's shows. We see a lot of people do trailer integrations, where they integrate the trailer of another podcast in their show, or just give each other shout outs. So this is the main aspect that we started with. But now recently, we also launched a monetization option, which is still podcast to podcast, but it allows some podcasters to sell basically trailer swaps or trailer integrations. And the other podcaster doesn't have to do anything. They can just pay them for it. So basically creating the first kind of scalable growth channel to get further reach in the right medium, with the right podcast. So giving a few more options for podcasters to grow if they don't have necessarily the time or the interest in collaborating directly with podcasters.
Got it. So the thing that you mentioned is, now you're introduce this new feature where, you kind of like paid promotions, like intro swaps and everything. So
Yeah.
one thing I couldn't crack on the platform is that once you like paid the podcaster, in order to, get your intro on their platform. So it's it like on the platform, is there any metrics that's been allowed, to see any conversions or as such, or is it like, um, is a connection between those two people? Then entirely it just goes to the podcasters for the conversations, like what metrics has been done, the conversions. So it's entirely up to podcasters, or the platform does something for them as well.
So right now, it's still a measurement is up to the people that participate. So mostly the podcast that is buying a spot or promotion is responsible to figure out how much it worked, check the listener numbers, see the spikes. We guide through the process so everyone knows exactly when an episode goes live, which episodes it is. So you have all the information you need to make the assessment. In the future, we want to add more options to actually do the tracking. It's a bit more complicated. We would love to offer this from the beginning, but since we need an integration for really both podcasters, we need good access to some data points that actually allow this. It's not the most feasible thing to do from the beginning, but it's definitely something we're aiming for, to create a bit more, let's say, transparency on how well it works and which promotion work better than another one.
Got it. Any like, for example, this is a threshold of amount that the podcaster should have. For example, okay, this is one guy. I'll just say one guy. That's just one example. This is one guy who mentioned to me earlier that he's got around 40,000 listens, in his podcast. Okay, so he just mentioned that it's not an Audrey. It's just in general. I was talking to some other guy, and what I found is that I thought it's like, average per episode listens. It was like that. Then I actually talked to one of his friends. Then he mentioned it's like, bro, it was like for 2 years, total number of listens of his entire podcast was 40,000 listens. So as you can see, it's like there's a major communication gap is one, and I can't go on, find out unless he mentioned it to someone else. So in Audrey, like, is there any place where, for example, if a person is putting $100, per intro swap, like is there any threshold like this number of listens should have this, or what do you think the main problem would be coming between this? Because I know it's a new feature, and if someone tries it, they may get swapped. So I just want them, like, a customer question, like they're asking, like, what the issue I might face in the future for this.
No, it's a very fair question. It's a very fair question, and anyone could say anything. Like the person you just mentioned could give you one number that means something completely different than what you think it means or what they communicate. So in Audrey, generally, we have an option for any podcaster to specify how many listens they get per episode. It's a field that we have since the beginning. People have give some indication of how big they are also for collaborations. And we have a verification process where we verify whether that's actually the case. So, and then anyone that verifies their account or their reach per episode gets a little icon. Generally, this is outside of the paid promotions. For the paid promotions, we do an extra step and verify whether the numbers they give are actually correct. And there we always ask for the right data points and screenshots and just proof that really gives us the feeling that what this person is saying is correct. It's not just a random number. So we have this constantly where people try to claim a reach that is obviously not what it is from the proof they send us. They claim something and they send us a proof that says otherwise. So then we just use the number that we think is the most accurate one, or we just flat out refuse verification if we don't think we have enough proof.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think one of the points is, like, the podcast has to take care of, like, checking all of these things as well, like, just taking the the social media or their authenticity on, because there is a lot of people who just blindly do anything for numbers. Like, you just need to get more listens, and I think as a podcast it might be good, because they don't want like, they shouldn't play sorry they shouldn't actually blame the platform for these sort of questions, because it's no guarantee, right? I mean, what are the general problems that you think you're facing for in total of Audrey, general issues that people face that you might want to address it, a couple of things, or 3 or 4?
I mean, there's obviously many things we're trying to work on to make better. One thing that you mentioned is also the case with social media followings. For example, we have a lot of feedback from sellers where they say they have a specific reach on their podcast, but then actually their podcast is getting published in many different ways. So we don't really account for YouTube reach. So some people have a lot of YouTube followers and a lot of the podcast gets consumed by YouTube. That's not something we take into account for now, the reach numbers. So we always do purely based on the podcast listens, which is something that is obviously not ideal, because for some podcasters it makes no difference because it's 99% consumed through the regular podcasting apps, but for others and also have consumption on other platforms, it's a bit trickier. And that's a challenge where we're still looking into how we can actually get people the number that is more true, closer to the truth, if they have a lot of listening outside of the general podcast.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, this is a curious question I really had for a long time. Like, how long has it been since Audry has been launched?
March 2020, so roughly 2 years almost.
Yeah, roughly 2 years, because I actually got the email when it was first launched, and I think it was in the beta session. I actually got the email and signed in. Is it signing process and everything, is it the same, or do you guys do something different? Because a lot of new features has been added for past couple of years. So is there anything new that you guys doing at the start for signups? Is asking anything like that, or is it the same process?
So
simple process?
The basic sign up is the same. So we require the link to the Apple Podcast version of your podcast, because we use that to verify some basic information. But we also pull out your profile picture, your categories, your episodes. So we use all that to already fill in a lot of information when you set up your account, so you don't have to. And one thing that is different from the very beginning, first of all, it looks very different. The brand and the layout has changed dramatically within the first year. But also we have a more detailed onboarding flow. You're able to specify more of your needs and more your requirements, your asks, and what description about yourself. So there's a better combination of pre-filled data, but also customized information that you can put in as a podcaster.
Good. I mean, at the start it was really pretty simple. Then the interface was really good. The one thing I really found hard was I'll be brutally honest here, because as a customer, I've been using it for 1.5 years, so I have to be brutally honest. Like, I did not get a lot of replies from the people who I reached out. So I did get, but it was like really late. So either it's the person who they didn't check Audry, but you really had the email connections as well. Like, for example, if in case I have sent a message, or if they are sending the message, we'll be alerted through emails. So it was there. So any reason do you think why it didn't happen, or what do you think is a possibility to maximize that, like to get the maximum possible outreach for collaboration and just getting reply as fast as possible? Is it on any things that we say, or the people that we reach out to? Anything which you think can be improved?
Yeah, we definitely, there's multiple dimensions to that. So sometimes it's just not a good fit, and then people just don't respond. So that's always a possibility. Obviously, you are more interested in them than they are in you, or that's one thing where we can do very little. What we try to optimize is more recommendations. So you're more likely to reach out to someone that is actually has a similar interest, creates similar content, and gets more value. We filter based on reach and content types, and just type of podcast. For messages, generally, we have a few things on our blog for like a good message to reach out to make it easier for the other person to understand what you're looking for. And one thing we also changed, I mean, you've seen this, it was last year, we added a collaboration workflow, which guides the conversation a bit more to make it really as easy as possible for the other person to understand what you're looking for and for you to tell them what you want. So basically to minimize the time need to actually send a request, but to maximize the information that you're giving the other person to make a decision. And sometimes it's just people don't check Audry that often. So we're not a platform that a lot of people use every day. People often come when they have a specific need. And even though we send reminders and notifications, sometimes people just drop out for a while. That's also a reason why they might not respond. But then maybe a month or two later, they come back and they see your message and get back to you.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, like, email notification really helped a lot. But like I said, sometimes it took really a long time, I guess. But some more really, really good podcasts that actually got a reply. For example, I once had a podcast called Sex and Everything Else, and I was able to get like exact people who actually, want to talk about it, and the people who are actually interested, or similar podcast. I really had those sort of things. So yeah, I can really understand the improvement. So any app, Audrey application is in process. Is there any surprise?
Yeah, and that's a question we get a lot right now. Not building it, so there's so many things you want to work on, and then building an app is also not a small thing, even though it always seems simple. It's definitely planned. We definitely want it. It needs to happen, but right now we unfortunately still don't have the capacity to develop it. But we'll get on this as soon as we can.
Awesome. That's great. So just a couple of things before going to the last section is it morning or evening there? What time is it?
Oh, right now it's in the afternoon, so it's around 4:30 in the afternoon in
4:30
in Germany.
Okay. So so there's a question I generally ask to all of my guests is that who was actually the last person that you made smile today?
The last person.
Yeah.
I mean, in that case, it was probably a good friend of mine, because I'm meeting him for dinner tomorrow. And I took care of a reservation, and we're going to a restaurant we're both very big fans of. So I managed to get one last minute at the time we wanted. So I think that was probably the last person.
Oh, that's great. Last minute reservation smiles. That's really a worthy ones. Yeah. Awesome. So the couple of things I want to ask is that since you started as like a podcast guest making platform, or people who, or more accurate is collaboration is the word that I would use. So what do you think is the future that's coming up around it? So previously, okay, the one thing I was really surprised is that when for the intro swaps, previously it wasn't any pricings or anything that wasn't in Audrey, right? But now you actually have made it in a monetized manner. So possibly not a lot of people would have thought that intro swaps might be an option for monetization. So this was like a new idea for that. So what do you think is the future here? Like, do you think people will jump into more on this? I mean, not a lot of podcasters have the budget to do a lot of things. So what do you think is the future? Like, how much do you think this particular collaboration stuff will work out?
Yeah, so generally we are firm believers that collaboration is one of the best ways to grow a show. Just the type of collaboration might differ from podcast to podcast, but across other content formats, I'd say, for example, YouTube, you just see that one of the main growth drivers is creators coming together, creating content together, and then introducing each other to the other audience. So we just think in podcasting, one thing that needs to change is the way podcasts collaborate dependent on size. So the paid section of paid promotion was also one of our first now attempts to bridge the gap between different size shows, basically by enabling a value transfer independent of the size of the podcast that is paying. So you can give value to the other podcaster even though you might be much smaller, which is something that was a bit difficult before on Audrey, because you would have to have a very generous collaboration partner if they have 10 times their audience size to still work with you.
Yeah.
So one thing is we see more podcasters of different sizes working together and collaborating, which is something we're working on. But then on the other hand, also podcasters really switching up how they collaborate. I think we're still at the beginning of the types of collaborations, and like you said, a trailer integration or shout out is pretty basic. It's pretty simple. You can do it any day if you find the right person. We're also expecting more complex collaborations that might be more longer terms, co-creating more content. And the main thing that is missing from the market is right now a structured way of doing this. It's still very chaotic. You don't have your base. You don't have your one platform where you go for all your needs. You don't have your Instagram or your YouTube as a podcast creator. So with more platforms coming up that support podcasters in different ways, be it monetization, growth, branding, content creation, editing, you name it, we think podcasters will get more creative as they have the tools to actually start doing things without having to sink hours and hours of time into research, education, actually figuring out how it works.
Got it. Yeah, I think the one thing you really mentioned was the long-term collaborations. I think that's what is mostly lacking in a lot of places. So that's just one collaboration thing that I kind of found on Instagram with a lot of digital marketers recently was one person will be so good at writing content or even finding the ideas, the other guy will be good at designing. So they will be like, now the Instagram has this collaboration option, where, they can click yes and it will be shared on both the platforms. So I guess that's one thing. So just curious, like anything coming on top of your mind, like what do you think the future long-term collaboration plan might be? Anything that's coming on top of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what you said, I think one thing that is very likely to happen is that multiple people work on a show together, but in a way where everyone benefits from the actual success of a show. So right now, oftentimes, for example, you have the host, and that's the face, and it's the editor, and they do everything, and then they get the donations, or they collect the marketing dollars. So with more tools, you could actually set up a podcast as a business and say, okay, these are the people that own the business. They have a shared success. You have an own joint account, and you pay out based on contribution. So then, for example, you say you are the host and you plan the show and you edit the show. You deserve 80% of the success, but then you have your marketing person or your designer who creates the icons for the shows. They should also get 10% each. So that way you have a more structured way to actually collaborate and do something. And there's a lot of interesting companies coming up that also work on Web3 and crypto, where you have these things where crypto is being sent to shows based on how much you listen. So as a fan, you send crypto to a show. And there's also the ideas of NFTs, which there's some very bad ideas and there's some more interesting ideas. Some seem more fraudulent, some seem more exciting. But generally, the technologies that are building there are supporting the same approach, which is make sure everyone gets rewarded based on their contribution and create these logics where it can happen in an automated way. And maybe you can even do more stuff and you get more rewards, and you can drop all the nitty-gritty details of tracking every single hour or tracking every single action, because that's done for you, which also works really well with podcasting since it's so decentralized. The consumption is decentralized, the distribution is decentralized. Why not make the creation of the content also very decentralized? I think that's a big trend that we'll see more and more. And let's see who cracks it first.
That's a really
maybe one more thing also on decentralization. With these mechanics and different tools, that also enables podcasters to just create their own little independent networks. So in the last couple of years, it was mostly dominated by big media companies, and they would build these big media networks and podcast networks, and then they would get someone on board once they hit a certain size and then start monetizing them. But just because of a lack of tools, it was almost impossible as an indie podcaster to just stay away from those. And a lot of podcasters kind of went around, like, I need to get to 10,000 listens a month and then I can join a network, because they thought that is the next step they have to take to make it big. Whereas with all the tools that are coming out now and the multiple companies open and working on making it more accessible for independent podcasters, you can actually stay away from big corporates, but then team up with other podcasters and maybe even form your joint network. And then you find one person who's really good at sales, and it helps you make all the money. And then you can again share the rewards based on whatever criteria you choose.
That's really great take. I mean, the one thing that you mentioned is that Web3, that's like it's so much booming right now in every single industry. But I think in podcasting, it's like 0.0000001% has been explored. As is only one news I found is that there's this company called Fountain.fm. They actually released an app where you can actually send bitcoins or as a rewards. And there's just one podcaster who just released something as an NFT. So, I'm just curious if you're interested, we can just talk a couple of minutes regarding this. How do you think that, in the Web3 space, podcasting can utilize? So one is the NFT we talked about, minting a particular, for example, a clip, like how Joe Rogan, stuff is going on. If people have minted that, then it would have been exploded on the internet. So any take on that, those couple of things in the Web3 in podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, the Fountain app is very interesting because it exactly solves the problem of rewards and just kind of giving back. And they make it super easy to donate in Bitcoin in that case. Or even though if you go on Twitter and you go to the podcast index page, there's a little button where you can send them Bitcoin directly. So even Twitter has now adopted a feature where you can send Bitcoins to people that you like. I think it's not open for all accounts, but if you go to the podcast index page, it's definitely there, so you can check it out. And I think this is just a much better way of sending your recognition or sending money to a creator. But this is also part of a bigger picture. So generally, Web3 is not only relevant for podcasters, but creators overall. So also, for example, let's say indie musicians, if they can put their songs on the blockchain, even as an NFT, I'm not an expert on that, but if that's the case, then it's always, they can always trace it back to them. Any platform that gets a listen can recognize that listen and send you your rewards directly. So you don't need a lot of middlemen anymore. So you as a creator have a more direct access to your fans by skipping all these middlemen. And if you have every single picture that you have, or every single song, every single video is an NFT, then also there's a whole new world for developers to build apps, like another alternative Instagram, alternative Spotify, alternative YouTube, because all the content already exists, and you just need to build the dashboard and the user interface, and you can plug in all these great resources from the start. You could build an online gallery and just have people display their own NFTs and their pictures that they have on there. So that's just a very interesting way, because if that is the way we're moving, then all of a sudden these platforms need to optimize for something that actually benefits the creator, because otherwise the creator will no longer distribute via your platform, or you could even implement logic into your NFTs and into your Web3 content that will not play on a certain platform if it doesn't get a certain reward. And which is just a very interesting dynamic where all of a sudden the power moves away from these aggregators and moves towards the actual content creators. I think for podcasting, it's very similar. All of a sudden you're way more in control, and the way that it's already decentralized makes sense that this is one of the first industries to actually start with, because you don't have these middlemen in the same fashion you have them for, say, music artists or record labels. And that's a very exciting way to look at it, and like a huge potential to get a deeper connection directly with your fans.
Yeah, that's true. It's really funny when you mention like there won't be much of aggregators, and I mean I'm not like hating Spotify. I really love Spotify app. I really love them, but they act like the monotonous, like they're the monopoly in everything. Like especially in podcasting, when Joe Rogan signed it up, and they signed a lot of people. The one thing that I really hated was a lot of podcasters thought that we should also go into the podcast, Spotify originals and stuff, but I mean, it's not really required unless you are like Joe Rogan show is pretty much an overall show. It's a kind of comedy show, but he interviews entrepreneurs as well. His genre is totally different. For people who are doing some other podcasts, I'm not so sure how their aim is just changed like that. So I think if this decentralization, what can bring us, I mean, the main motive is to get more rewards. If someone gives you $100 million to sign an agreement, you all obviously would. So I think one of the things you mentioned is like the aggregators. It would definitely remove all of them, just like all other platforms. Yeah, that really makes sense.
And whether you like or dislike Joe Rogan, one thing is true either way. It's he owned all of the content, so he was able to sell it to Spotify for 100 million. Whether that price tag is justified, who knows? That's a question for Spotify to answer. But for many creators, this should be a good sign, because it's a creator that owns their content. Like a lot of music artists don't own the rights. They cannot make the decision who can play their songs on which platform, because they're tied up in record labels, and the ownership of the song might be completely different from the actual artist that created it. Just how licensing works, who knows? It's complicated stuff. So if you have this direct connection, then all of a sudden you see how much money there is to be made for an individual creator if you don't have all these other stakeholders that will take money in the way. And also this creates a whole new dynamic where, as a smaller creator, you're more likely to be able to actually make a living of your content, because without middlemen, if you find a good way to interact with your biggest fans, and you get donations or subscription money, or through merchandising, live talks, whatever you want to do and you feel comfortable with and what resonates with your audience, you take all the profit and all the gains. So you are actually likely to make a living with a far smaller audience than like the mainstream artists.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there's this theory of 1,000 true fans. If you have 1,000 true fans that are willing to pay you $10 a month, you're already making over $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
And that's $10 is not insane if they're really big fans and you have a good way of interacting with them and rewarding them for their trust and their loyalty. Then it's not out of this like out of reality to expect these kind of numbers. And this only works if you skip all the middlemen.
Yeah.
And you don't have a large chunk of that revenue go to someone else.
Yeah, that's really a true point. I mean, I'm not sure whether you heard the news. Like, there was this one guy who actually became a millionaire overnight by selling his selfies as an NFTs. Yeah. So that was pretty crazy. I mean, if that guy can do that, I mean, as podcasters, people having a lot of content and, they've been putting out every single day and stuff. So yeah, so podcasters, just make sure of that. Just to, stay in touch with all these things. It might definitely boom a lot. So awesome. Nick, thank you so much for hopping onto the show. Is there any like last point that you want to give to the people who are using Audry or who want to use Audry? Like any last point, like just 1 minute or something you want to give? That would be great.
Yeah, maybe as a general point, not necessarily related directly to Audry, is like just keep doing what you're doing and keep trying new things. I mean, podcasting is one of the hardest mediums to build an audience for, especially if you don't have a large social following before and you don't have an audience. But it's really about trying how you can add more and more incrementally, and down the line, it will work out. It just might be a bit of a bigger struggle than starting an Instagram account. But at the end of the day, at least you can know that you own it completely. And if it's a success, you did it and you own it and you can do everything you want. So there's a lot of freedom that you have in creating a podcast and a lot of struggle, but ultimately I think it's far more rewarding once you then see the returns on your investment, whether that's money or fans or recognition.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it, guys. It's definitely worth it. So is there anything else you want to ask me? Like, table's turned right now.
I don't have any specific questions. I mean, do you have anything that I can tell you? Anything that you feel like I didn't touch on, or anything where I was unclear? Anything else you would like to know?
Actually, I really didn't know that you are so much into this Web3 and everything and stuff. So I think, I can definitely, like, we can do a separate whole episode for this Web3 and everything and stuff, because I really want to touch on that platform, because I actually have a small startup, but I'm working in a company as well. The company that I work do all of these things. And when these engineering guys and tech guys, when they talk, I mean, like, what are you guys talking about? It's like they talk too much tech stuff. So it's really hard for me to, as a marketing guy, it's really hard for me to catch up on. We really mostly work on the metrics. So yeah, if any case, like probably in the future, we could definitely do a whole episode on that. So, and you can also explore a lot of other options, then we can do that if you want.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Awesome. So yeah, guys, just check out that for as well. Probably in season 9, you'll be listening to it. And yeah. And Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the show. If in case people want to find you and, ask about Audry and, find Audry, if you could just list down, it would be great.
Perfect. I mean, if you want to reach me, you can also email me directly. I'm usually, my email box is open. Niklas@audry.io. You reach me always, otherwise, find us on social media. We are on all the big ones. Can message us, everything gets back. But yeah, the easiest way is send me an email and I'll get back as soon as I can. Or if anyone is testing out Audry, find something they don't like, also let me know. We're always happy to hear what are the things we can improve and what would make your life a little bit easier. Sometimes it's not that easy to guess from just user data and what people do on the platform.
Awesome. So guys, I'll definitely link his email in the blog and also social links. He'll definitely get back to you. Don't worry. And thank you so much, Nick, again for coming on to the show. And guys, I'll see you in the next episode.